Sex and the Creative Process. Rule 11. Guidelines for Traveling the Spiritual Path according to the teachings of Alice Bailey. Video by Dr. Lisa Love. Group 7. Probationary Disciple. This is the 11th of 14 rules found in the Alice Bailey book, Initiation Human and Solar, that those who are connected to Bailey's Group 7 Probationary Discipleship stage are meant to follow. These rules are only recommendations, but if followed, they will help you along the spiritual path to have fewer difficulties as you progress. Remember, it is important, as much as possible, to not skip steps and to do the inner work to make sure you are walking the talk. Rule 11. Let the disciple transfer the fire from the lower triangle to the higher, and preserve that which is created through the fire of the midway point. Commentary from Initiation Human and Solar, page 206. This means literally the control by the initiate of the sex impulse, as usually understood, and the transference of the fire which now normally vitalizes the generative organs to the throat center, thus leading to creation upon the mental plane through the agency of mind. That which is to be created must then be nourished and sustained by the love energy of nature issuing from the heart center. The lower triangle referred to is the solar plexus, the base of the spine, the generative organs, whilst the higher one is, as pointed out, the head, throat, the heart. This might be interpreted by the superficial reader as an injunction to the celibate life and the pledging of the applicant to abstain from all physical manifestation of the sex impulse. This is not so. So here we have the triangle of solar plexus, base of the spine, generative organs, or sacral center, and it's at the top simply because that's the way the text is, but that doesn't mean that that triangle is the higher triangle. It's the lower triangle. And then we have another triangle meant to reflect the head, throat, and heart. And the reason I put those there is because I want to remind us of the transfers that we learned about in a previous video on the previous rule. That we move from the generative organs or the sacral center up to the throat center. And that's what the first initiation is primarily about, making that transfer happen. There are two other transfers, solar plexus to heart, that's the second initiation. Base of the spine to head, that's the third initiation. But these rules are primarily centered on the first initiation. That's why we continue to see this emphasis on the transfer of the sacral center to the throat center. And what does that involve? It involves the control by the initiate of the sex impulse and the transference of that fire, which normally vitalizes the generative organs, the sacral center, up to the throat center. Why? Because we're no longer creating through the sacral center or using the sacral center or sex impulse to manipulate others to get creations for money, sex, pleasure, and power. Instead, we're creating through the agency of the throat center or mind, which, as we're going to continue in my commentary here, reflects higher truths. And we're also going to learn in my commentary, which will come a little later, how whatever we create, we're responsible for those creations. We're karmically responsible to sustain them through the love energy issuing from the heart center. We must steward those creations to a higher level of consciousness, which is why we want to be careful of whatever we create, either through the sacral center, because we're responsible for it, or through the throat center, our speech, etc., which we're also responsible for. Continuing with the commentary from Initiation Human and Solar. Many initiates have attained their objective when duly and wisely participating in the marriage relation. An initiate cultivates a peculiar attitude of mind, wherein there is a recognition that all forms of manifestation are divine, and that the physical plane is as much a form of divine expression as any of the higher planes. He realizes that the lower manifestation of divinity must be under the conscious control of that indwelling divinity, and that all acts of every kind should be regulated by the endeavor to fulfill every duty and obligation, to control every action and deed, and to utilize the physical vehicle so that the group may be thereby benefited and aided in its spiritual progress, and the law perfectly fulfilled. Now, don't get hung up on the fact that we're going to see the word he or man. These teachings were written about 100 years ago, and every book and magazine and newspaper all use the male pronoun, so don't let yourself get triggered by that. Continuing with the reading, that it may be advisable at certain stages for a man to perfect control along any particular line through a temporary abstention is not to be denied, but that is a means to an end, and would be succeeded by stages when, the control having been gained, the man demonstrates perfectly through the medium of the physical body the attributes of divinity, and every center will be normally and wisely used, and thus race purposes furthered. So we're going to comment on this, but just some highlights. It's saying that you can be married or not, you can be celibate or not, practice brahmacharya, celibacy or not. That's not the point. The point is that we are learning on the physical plane to have any form we express through, including sexual nature, express the divinity that we find on the higher planes. That we are attempting to regulate whatever we do. We had a rule on eating and nutrition, that we're attempting to regulate everything we do in such a way that it fulfills every duty and obligation of our spiritual inner nature. We want whatever we do, every action and deed, to utilize the physical vehicle so that the group may be benefited, aided in its spiritual progress. So there's a few key points here. We're thinking of, does this help my group? Does this help the overall group life? Does this help express divine life? Is this regulated? Am I fulfilling my duties and obligations when I undergo this particular action or deed? There's a lot to think about here. And the sexual life we're going to discover is then full of thought before we undertake it, and ultimately meant to be divinely expressed. And it says that temporary abstention is not to be denied, that when we undergo periods of celibacy, it has a purpose. It is a means to an end. It's to help us work on ourselves, perhaps, or control it and sublimate it in such a way that it expresses more divinely, so to speak. The goal here is for us to demonstrate perfectly through the medium of the physical body the attributes of divinity, and to do that through every center, not just the generative organs or sacral center. Continuing to read the rule. Initiates and masters in many cases marry and normally perform their duties as husbands, wives, and householders, but all is controlled and regulated by purpose and intention, and none is carried away by passion or desire. In the perfect man upon the physical plane, all the centers are under complete control, and their energy is legitimately used. The spiritual will of the divine inner God is the main factor, and there will be a unity of effort shown on all the planes through all the centers for the greatest good of the greatest number. This point has been touched upon because so many students go astray upon these matters and cultivate either an attitude of mind which results in the complete atrophying of the entire normal physical nature, or indulge in an orgy of license under the specious plea of stimulating the centers and thus furthering astral development. The true initiate should be known by his wise and sanctified normality, by his steady conformity to that which is best for the group, is emphasized by the group laws of the land, by his control and his refraining from excess of any kind, and by the example he sets to his environing associates of spiritual living and moral rectitude, coupled with the discipline of his life. And again, don't get caught up on the he, man, etc. here. So, some interesting things. First of all, initiates and masters marry. I'm thinking of, you can look him up, he's a wonderful person to be aware of, Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, in the Buddhist tradition, revered by many in our modern times as a living Buddha. He was married. Later in his life, he was married. Then I'm thinking of Lahiri Maheshai in the tradition of Paramahansa Yogananda, also somebody who was married. So it's not whether we're married or not married, it's that even if we're a husband, wife, or householder, or we're not, everything is controlled and regulated by purpose, and we're not carried away by passion or desire. And it's a tricky thing to look at our desires. Why are we wanting to have sex with somebody? What is it we're hoping to have happen with that person? Too often it's motivated by our desire for money or security, or even if a family establishes that marital alliance so that the family can have more money or more security or more prestige if we marry a particular person. So she's hot, so if I marry her, I'll have more prestige. He has money, he's a billionaire, so if I marry him, I'll have more prestige. I'll get more power. I'll get a momentary feeling of pleasure because I get the feeling of being bonded with somebody that through sex that is my idea of something I really desire, a supermodel or a billionaire or something like that, or somebody I've always looked at and longed for my whole life, and finally I get to have sex with that person, and then poof, the desire is fulfilled, and my desire to be with that person is now gone away. These are all the lower triangle dictating things. We're trying to transfer the fire from the lower triangle, and I showed you what that triangle was about. The sacral, the base of the spine, the solar plexus, up to the higher triangles of the throat, the heart, and the head, and create from there. That's what we're trying to do here. And then to bring all the centers under complete control and use their energy in a legitimate way. And it's normal that we go astray. One way we go astray is we try and go to either extreme. We'll either become celibate and we can't handle it, and so that's why you often see that perverse sublimation, with priests who are molesting children, etc., or ministers of spiritual organizations, even if they're married, having affairs or molesting people. I mean, that is a sign that this transfer did not take place, that person is not yet at the first initiation, or has not completed the first initiation, I should say, because all of this is a test of the first initiation. Every initiation has, in the Bailey teachings, its beginning, its middle, and its ending stage. The beginning is the preparation. The middle is where we undergo the first experiences of oneness, which we see in the first several rules of these 14 rules. And then after we've undergone that experience of oneness, these rules then say, now the integration phase is where we have to, understanding that oneness, go through the transfers. And at the first initiation, it's the transfer from the sacral center to the throat center. We have to get a handle on the sacral center and its desires, not only for sex, but for pleasure. That's why we have the rule about food in here. We're trying to make that transfer happen primarily at this stage from the sacral center to the throat center. The other extreme is indulge in an orgy of license. And I think it's interesting because she has, under the specious plea of stimulating the centers, the whole westernized version of Tantra, as we can have sex with whoever because we're initiating that person in sex, or we're helping that person transfer to a higher level sexually, etc. This is a prediction in these books that distortion is also going to happen. And some people that have had the middle stage of the first initiation and haven't fully integrated may fall into this, where they're suddenly involved in Tantra practices with people they barely know, they barely love. Why do they talk about having to have a marriage relation here? Because we're trying to become very, very conscious about why we're engaging in any sexual interplay with anybody, and I'll talk more about this in the commentary that follows here in a moment. We also need to be known by our wise and sanctified normality. So the polyamory movement, that's really big, especially I'm in California, a lot of it's big in California, is we can have many partners. I've actually worked as a counselor with people in that movement. Believe me, it's not that easy of a thing to do. It's hard enough with one person to do it in a really truly loving and spiritual way and a conscious way, let alone a lot of people. It gets really complicated. As I've counseled some of those people, I've become very aware of the complications and difficulties a lot of them have. I don't want to get into that in this video. This video will never end if I do that. But in general, it's better to not enter that kind of movement because it's so much more complex and it's difficult enough to try and become really conscious and truly loving in the higher centers with one person. And therefore, we're also aware that we're part of a group and we're trying to do things that will help the overall group accelerate its life along the spiritual path. And that's why we are trying to refrain from excesses of any kind here. We're also trying to set an example, not only for our group, but our society and the associates that we have in our spiritual life. And that means we're trying to have moral rectitude and a disciplined life. And often, especially in the West, especially, I might say, America, especially California, it's so easy to try and discount moral rectitude and try and make it seem as if we've jumped over that stage and we're much more spiritual now, having never really undergone moral rectitude and disciplined our lives thoroughly in that way, which is a hint that maybe we're not quite finished with the first initiation. So now we're going to get into my commentary on the rules, starting with sex. Why is it such a big deal? I mean, it's a really big deal in the West where I live. It's almost all you ever see on television and in media, which is why, at least somebody like me, my watching that kind of thing has become so narrow, because so much of it is all about the three lower centers, the lower triangle. So much of it is about power, which people want to achieve through violence or through sex or through stimulating the desire nature. So much of humanity is living in groups 3, 4, 5, and 6. Go back and watch those previous videos. And when we enter probationary discipleship and are trying to go through the first initiation, we're in group 7. And so we're trying to move away from the lower triangle and the things that it's obsessed with. And almost all of the media out there is obsessed with, which is why so little of it is appealing to group 7, especially groups 8, 9, and 10. So as I write this, yet another politician is having his career potentially dismantled after being accused of some form of sexual abuse. On the more horrific side, sexual abuse includes things like rape and molestation. They say that 1 out of every 3 women and 1 out of every 5 men are sexually molested or raped at some point in their lives, and some say it's probably as high as 1 out of every 2 women, 1 out of every 3 men. So even though we're supposedly Homo sapiens, wise homos, wise human beings, I'm not so sure that's the case, especially when so much of the sacral center is being misused and abused. Other types of inappropriate sexual behavior can also destroy jobs, careers, reputations, even lives, including behaviors involving adultery, or saying you were celibate when you were not, or unwanted touching. What this rule mainly is talking about then is the right use of sexual energy, and is particularly concerned with the transfer between the sacral, procreative center, generative organs, up to the throat center. We've already talked somewhat about that. The throat center represents truth, integrity, and creativity in the higher sense, where our creations help the good of the whole. Our creations at that level are trying to spiritually reveal or integrate or create a synthesis or greater harmony or show higher values or decrease the desired nature. Creativity at the throat center is less about sexuality and pleasure and more about spiritual realities that express themselves through speech and the visual arts at this level. Thus, the fire at the midway point, which at one level is the heart center, representing love for each other and our world, is kept intact. And another, it's the heart center in the head. So, one of the things that's very important, even in a lot of the books about the chakras, and I have at least a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, I'd have to go count them again, books on the chakras that I've read. I've actually read them, almost all of them in their entirety. And the disappointment in pretty much all of them is they talk about the throat center being creative, and then a lot of people think they have the throat center open because they're being creative, and yet a lot of their creative works are coming through the sacral center. And they don't even like to be judged for the idea that the things that they're creating in music and art and movies is coming through the sacral center. But you can tell that. What does that feed? What values are being fed there? Power, sex, pleasure, and money are all coming through the sacral center. If that's the theme of whatever has been created, that's where it's been created, through the sacral center. If it's been created through the throat center, it's representing truths, higher truths, perennial truths. It's helping to forward the perennial philosophy. It is in integrity. It is walking the talk. It's not talking it and then forgetting about it, which means it's been dropped down through the sacral center and expressed through the sacral center. That's what happens when we don't walk talk. That can even happen, which is part of the chela in the light stage of the first initiation. The chela in the light has a lot of intellectual esoteric knowledge, but isn't walking the talk. The focus is more on what we know intellectually about esoteric matters than it is about how we are living. That's a problem, especially after we've gone through the middle stage of the first initiation, where we've had the realizations of oneness, and we're not yet integrating or walking the talk. We must walk the talk to make this transfer happen. We must be creative in the higher sense. So what does that mean? That means during the first initiation, where we're doing this sacral center to the throat center transfer, that sex and pleasure assume less importance as higher creativity takes place. It's just not a big deal anymore. It's regulated. We may engage in it in a regulated way, especially when the fire, the midway point, or love is really involved in the process. There's a real connection of love between the two people, and that love is not desire. That's especially the second initiation has a lot to do with solar plexus, desire for power, prestige, to look like a spiritual somebody. All that has to be sublimated into the heart center where real love is taking place. People may not even recognize us as anybody spiritually because we're so focused on love taking place. We're working in a group and sublimating ourselves into that group and learning the lessons of love, not just for a partner, but for other people. And we're learning those lessons of love in a deep way. And sex and pleasure, they're just not a big deal anymore. What is a big deal is love, the fire, the midway point. And it takes time. That's what marriage is really about. It's the commitment to take time to go in depth with somebody, to really come to understand that person, to help each other work through the triggers and difficulties and emotional reactions and reactivities that we have so that we can get a true deep understanding of each other and learn wise action in how to be with each other to grow. Now, you can have that not just in a marriage relationship, you can have that in a partnership. Some of the argument going on between to be married or not married is marriage so often is just a cultural imposition on people, and that imposition may or may not involve those people over time learning how to grow and evolve spiritually. It can. I had the luxury, because my discipline that I have undertaken as a job, so to speak, for 40 years now has been love and relationships. So I've actually met many people who have been married 60 years plus. The longest was 77 years. And as I talked to them, I would try and understand what was it that helped them stay married so long. Some of them, to be quite honest, one said it was because we weren't together a whole heck of a lot. He was in the military and we rarely saw each other. Some of them said that basically they were just stuck together for financial reasons. One person said her husband had just died and I had gone to see her. She'd been married about 67 years. Was that she was glad he was finally dead. He was a very abusive and controlling man. So some of it wasn't always this wonderful thing of why they stuck together. But some of them it was, well, we were about ready to break up. And then because of our commitment, we decided to stick together and we reached a whole new level of love for each other. And some of them would talk about how that repeated itself several times in the relationship, and they would go deeper and deeper and deeper in their understanding for each other. Sex did not play that much of a part because the love was so much more enriching. That some of them would also share with me. And that makes me look at some of the stuff that comes out now that's trying to make older people look like they're still really sexy and that sex is still a big thing. Sex may be a big thing, but it's minor compared to the other things that they have discovered through the fire, the midway point, or the depth of love that they have for each other. It's digging a really deep well of love for each other, which then helps them in that relationship learn to be more loving of others as well, children, community, etc. That's the value of a committed relationship. That isn't a commitment like a jail sentence, but is a commitment to keep achieving certain levels of understanding and love and integrity and compassion with each other. That's what we're wanting. But when we cannot keep the fire at the midway point through the energy of love that comes from the heart center, the desires in the lower triangle for money, sex, pleasure, power end up dominating the characteristics of the higher triangle: truth, integrity, compassion, inclusivity, vision, and unity. And one of the reasons why, especially in the West, is being accused of discarding partners too rapidly is that I just get bored. What are we bored of? These are couples that have been together 60 some to 77 years that didn't get bored. Why did they not get bored? Because of their ability to dig a deeper and deeper well, to unfold more and more layers of the heart petals, so to speak. The soul petals, the egoic lotus, together, and to come to deeper and deeper understanding of each other and of compassion for each other, and to have a deeper sense of the vision of why they were together and what the unity of that couple could achieve beyond simply my temporary sexual pleasure, or what I think I'm going to get if I bond with somebody else sexually in the way of power or prestige, or the money I'm going to get to go buy things or take trips somewhere. We really have to start looking at what drives sexual desire. Yes, hormones, but hormones, if you really look at it, you'll feel that hormonal pull. And if you dive into it, you'll say, what is it about this hormonal pull? And you'll usually find that at the lower triangle, it has something to do with this person could bring me money or security. Or this person might help me get a leg up in the financial world. This person will bring me sex or pleasure. I just want to get rid of my anxiety and have sex with somebody right now. I feel better. Or I just want to not feel so angry anymore. Or I want to have control over that person, and so I'm going to use my anger to dominate that person. Or I just want to feel more powerful over somebody. Or I just want to feel like I can get power by being with somebody, or prestige, as I've said. I mean, really look at any time that hormonal impulse comes up and meditate on it. And you might be really amazed to find out what it's really about. Now, a lot of people want to say it's about a soul connection. This is what I do for a living all day long for 40 years. So I've got a lot of experience in this area. And again, analyze it. Is it really a soul connection, or is it that that person represents certain things that you're missing in your life? Like maybe that's a very joyous human being and you wish you had more joy in your life. Or maybe that's a very adventurous human being and you wish you had more adventure in your life. Or maybe you're in a marriage that there's not a lot of adventure and you meet a very adventurous human being and you think, that person can bring me adventure. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's not about that person. Maybe it's about bringing more adventure into your relationship that you currently have. It's a very delicate, intricate thing here. I know this because I've not only sorted it out in my own life, I sorted out in the lives of other people to really understand what's going on here. And if we can be conscious, going back to the text, then we won't end up engaging in inappropriate and unloving behaviors. One of the things I do all the time too is help people unravel the feelings of abuse or manipulation or disappointment or promises unkept from the wrong use of the sacral center. The sacral to throat center. They're promised, they're given wonderful romantic evenings, or the woman promises or tantalizes or teases and then doesn't deliver. What is that? That's not having enough discernment through the ajna center. That's not being careful with promises and speech made through the throat center. And so the higher triangle is not activated. It drops into the lower triangle. And the fire at the midway point, love, is not preserved here. Instead, we become dominated by lust, even hate, when our selfish desires are not met, instead of love, which also includes compassion or inclusivity. So again, so many of my clients suddenly, they hate the person that was their soulmate not too long before. A few months ago, that person was my soulmate. Now it's somebody I hate. What is that really about? It's about not being familiar enough with ourselves, not being familiar enough with other people, not taking the time to get to know each other, which is something we don't do in the West much anymore. It's like if you've been on a second date, you should have sex already. The expectations are so heavy because the West is so struggling with some of the countries in the West also go through their initiations. And we could say that maybe the overemphasis, I live in the United States, on sex in this country right now is because it's struggling to lift from its sacral center or country as a whole up into the throat center. And it's really struggling with being able to do that. So instead of compassion and inclusivity and love, the fire at the midway point dominating, lust and the lower emotions dominate, and then we may even have certain people engage in deception and lies instead of truth and integrity because we want to protect ourselves from losing power, pleasure, sex, and money. Oh, you caught me with my pants down, the politician I mentioned earlier in the previous slide. Here, you caught me with my pants down. I don't want to admit to it. I'll lose my power, pleasure, sex, and money. And so I cover it up. And we often hear it's not so much what happens, it's the cover-up that becomes the increased problem. Why? Because that's proof that the higher triangle isn't working. Love for other people, the community, the population you represent isn't there. Truth isn't there. Integrity isn't there. What is there is, I don't want to lose power, pleasure, sex, and money, so I'll do anything to lie, anything to deceive, anything to hold on to what I've got instead of relinquish it. One of the things in the United States that makes this democracy a democracy is the willingness to relinquish power. That's what George Washington did. That's what a true democracy is supposed to be about, that you relinquish power for the well-being of the greatest good of the greatest number. So if we really look at it, it's not so much having sex with someone that is the problem then. It's not really sex that's the problem. It's a lack of vision. That's the ajna center, one of the head centers in the higher triangle. It's a lack of vision as to what is this sexual relationship going to produce? What will this lead to? If I'm with this person and have sex, am I going to have an unwanted child? If I'm with this person and have sex, am I going to hurt that person because I won't be able to be responsible for that which is created at the midway point? I won't be able to be responsible for their hurt feelings if I don't follow through on certain promises that the sexual connection is implying I'm going to have here. Do I have a vision, a sense of who is this person that I'm going to have sex with? That's why it used to be in the time of my mother and father, they were expected to date 2 years before they had sex. And most of them complied with that. Yes, there was stuff that went on behind the scenes, etc., etc. But in general, the point was, I'm supposed to get to know this person I'm going to have sex with. You know, in the West, they like to practice Tantra, but they don't even understand what Tantra is in the East. In the East, it involves things like lying next to each other in bed for a year with your clothes on, and then lying next to each other in bed for a year without your clothes on, and with or without your clothes on, you're not supposed to touch each other at all. You're just supposed to lie next to each other. Why? To prove that you're getting to know each other and that sex isn't the main thing driving it. So how Tantra went from basically 2 years of lying next to each other with and without clothes, without touching each other at all, went to Tantra communities where people get together and they don't even know each other and they're having tantric sex with each other, is a really kind of distortion, a major distortion of Tantra that happened here in the West. It is the lack of love that takes place when we unite with someone to satisfy our own lust. It takes time to get to know somebody. You can't just sit in a tantric yab-yum posture with somebody else that you don't even know and do breathing exercises to raise the energy of the chakras. That's just not how it works. You'll do some pranayama with that. You'll connect with the other person's etheric body and have a kind of high experience, but that's not love. Love is intimacy, intimacy. It's depth of knowing another person. And that takes time. That takes a long time. That's how you move the solar plexus to the heart center. Getting back to my text, or it is the hope that the sexual interaction will bring us more money, status, pleasure, and power. These are the lower triangles I'm talking about. If you lack vision, you lack love, and you're operating from desire for money, status, pleasure, and power, you're in the lower triangle. You're not doing the first initiation. You're either still somewhere in groups 3, 4, 5, and 6. You're maybe a group 6 aspirant just starting the spiritual path, or you were in the first initiation, you've had some of the first initiation experience happen, but then in the integration stage, the third stage, you've lost your way. You haven't completed it. Sexual energy is also misused when the person we have sexual relations with is unconscious of what is really being engaged in that dynamic. That's why young children, they don't understand what's going on. They're not conscious. The partner we pick has to be conscious. They have to be educated, and there can't be a misplaced power dynamic. You read about, there's a great book called Sex and the Guru, I believe it's called. Sex and the Spiritual Guru, Sex and the Guru. I'd have to go look the book up. I don't want to while I'm doing this video here. But it's a great book that really analyzes the imbalances of power that take place and why ultimately the injunction of a guru not having sex with anybody is there in place. If there's stories of a guru having sex and the other person doesn't know what it's about, isn't at the same level of consciousness, etc., it's most likely manipulation. And there's stories in the East where, males, predominantly male gurus, are supposed to have sex with younger women predominantly so that it can help elevate that younger woman's spiritual status. Well, a lot of what's really going on there is sexual etheric vampirism. And you need to know about that. I know a lot about this kind of stuff, having been involved in this field for many decades and having to have been exposed to way much more information about sex than I ever thought I would have to be exposed to when I started out wanting to be a love and relationship counselor. But it's part of the dynamic, and it's part of the first initiation. So we have to be careful when a spiritual teacher, going back to the text, or someone in a position of influence has sex with a student or someone supposedly under their care, because it's probably showing that that person has not yet completed the first initiation, or maybe that person went a little farther into the second initiation and has had a big fall. At that point, that's part of what happens at the end of the second initiation. You're tested on the 3 lower centers. Have the transfers really been made between sacral to throat and solar plexus to heart as you're getting ready to transfer base of the spine to the head? If they haven't been made, then a major fall is going to happen. And that's a really big deal. You don't want that kind of fall. So what you want to do is get really aware of all the misuses and abuses that can happen in the dynamic of the transfer from the sacral center to the throat center, not only in your own life, but in the life of spiritual communities, in the lives of so-called spiritual teachers. They can be spiritual to a certain level, more advanced than most of humanity, which is groups 3, 4, 5, and supposedly the next group that's coming in is 6, not even group 7. So those that are in group 7 are pretty advanced, but they're also still pretty prone to having difficulties with sex, money, pleasure, and power. And very likely to either be tempted or to justify getting off track as somehow spiritual, when the truth is it's not. They've just been led astray. The point is, love, compassion, and consciousness are not present when sexual energy is used in the ways I described just in the previous slide. They're not. If I'm not conscious of why I'm having sex with this guru, because the guru, I just think I'm having sex with this guru must really be somebody evolved, they want sex with me, and it must be an honor to have sex with this person or this tantric teacher or whoever, but I'm not at the same level of consciousness, there's a problem there. If I'm not really aware of the dynamic of what's going on, there's a problem there. And that's why the best rule of thumb is no to any sexual contact between a guru and a student or a chela or disciple. No. That's why gurus are either celibate or married traditionally in a committed, singular committed relationship, because a true guru beyond the first initiation is really not demonstrating the desire to have sex with somebody. It may surface at the end of the second initiation, again as a temptation, and then a major fall. That person has probably been really good for a long time, and then they're tempted and there's a major fall, and usually they take the whole group and the whole spiritual community or service activity, whether it's in science or the arts or politics or whatever, they take that whole thing down with them if they've been tempted at that point and they fail to pass that test. Not a good thing. So the general rule, the best rule, is either get into a healthy, committed, loving relationship where both of you are committed to a spiritual path, both of you are pretty much on the equal level, and work at having a spiritual life together in a committed relationship with a regulated, loving, infused sex life, or be celibate. Those are the best choices. Now, I'm in the West. Lots of us, almost all of us, are making mistakes sexually here. Maybe less so in the East, where this tends to be suppressed, or you're forced into a marriage and there's much more rules and restrictions around being able to have sex outside. But here in the West, where it's anything goes, lots of mistakes are made. Not taking time to get to know a partner, believing things that don't come true, feeling manipulated and abused, being sexually molested or raped, often at a young age, and being traumatized by that, and then repeating unhealthy sexual relations or relationships with people out of that trauma. There's a lot of cleanup work that has to be done in the West. Starting to believe that everything is about sex, and sex is the purpose of life, and the more sex the merrier, and then getting lost in the realm of pleasure and getting totally lost off the spiritual path. Those things are extremely common now in the West, and it's a mess. And it's a mess that I spend my days, again, helping a lot of people go through. Maybe at some point I'll get to retire. If you watch this video and you hear me say I don't do that anymore, it's because I got to retire from that profession and I got to just focus primarily on spiritual teaching and practice. That's my goal. But in general, I see and hear and deal with and hopefully help a lot in this area of this sacral center to the throat transfer. Often the people engaged in these kinds of sexual interactions are either unconscious about what is really going on, you're just helpless, you don't know why the priest is molesting you, and then they're triggering off a pleasure response and orgasm, it feels good, and the next thing you know, you've got this weird attachment of pleasure and sex and feel good with unhealthy kinds of dynamics that you have to untangle. Or you're only somewhat conscious about what's going on. Oh, this person looks great. We got a lot of things in common. I think this person is going to be my soulmate. We get together and then, oops, there's all this other stuff that I didn't see that doesn't work. And now I feel trapped. And now I'm in a committed relationship in terms of like it's a jail sentence. And I don't know what to do or how to get out of it. or you're conscious, but you don't care because you're selfish. I am conscious of the fact that I'm manipulating other people out of their money through sex, or manipulating them so I can maintain power, or manipulating them with little pleasure things that make them go, "Ooh, that was so amazing." And, but that's good. They keep me in my power status position as a guru or political leader or whatever. But in general, that's even worse because they're conscious of what they're doing and they're doing it selfishly. Finally, the point is sexual energy is creative. It's going to produce something. It's either going to produce children or something else. This is something a lot of people don't understand. Every time there is an orgasm, something is created. Something is fed. And the question is, what? In the West, we tend to think that it's just all harmless. It's just me. I don't feel anxious anymore. I had an orgasm. Whoopee, that feels great. But you've created something. You've energized a thought. You've energized a desire. If you're with another person, you've helped energize that person's thoughts and desires, spoken or unspoken, in that interaction. You've created something, and you're now responsible for what you have created. Too often, as the text, the commentary from Initiation Human and Solar indicates, people use sex in a way too frequently where they're not willing to be responsible for what they create. They don't even think that anything has been created. What do you mean you're coming after me? Now all upset with your hurt feelings. I just wanted to have sex with you. That's it. Women are crazy. Those crazy women, they always think that they're going to have a relationship with you just because you had sex with them. Heard that umpteen hundred times through my male clients, typically. And yet, I once wrote an article, Why Orgasm Isn't Good for You. The biology of orgasm. In that it produces oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical. So even our brains are trying to get us to bond. Mother Nature's trying to get us to bond and connect with each other. And so we don't want to be accountable or responsible for what we've created. So we tend to lie, deceive, manipulate, act in hypocritical ways, pass the buck, blame somebody else. We don't want to face the truth of the misuse of our sexual energy and what is really going on there. What's really going on when we engage in porn? What's really going on when we shut a partner out sexually? What's really going on when we manipulate a partner sexually without love being present? We don't want to have to face the responsibilities of what we've created, not just the children that we've created that we may not be responsible for or care for, but the thoughts and desires we've created when we have an orgasm and energize that to go and have a life somewhere on the inner planes. We are responsible for it. And that's part of the massive cleanup work we have to do as well. So how do we remedy this whole mess we've created through the lower triangle? Creating everything through the sacral center for the sake of power, pleasure, sex is how we create it, and money. There's even books out there about how to use the law of attraction and attract whatever you want through sex. That's the lower centers. So there's books about how a couple comes together and they have sex a lot, and while they do, they're thinking about all the things that they want, money-wise, etc., or the car they want to buy or whatever. That's all the lower triangle stuff going on here. Any books or people engaged in that, they're not very far along the spiritual path, or they're not on the spiritual path at all here. Conscious creativity is motivated in a really different way as the sacral center goes up to the throat center. You want to do what's best spiritually for the greatest number of people, for yourself and for others. And that requires, first and foremost, you have to have vision. You have to have an ajna center really operating well so you can see who this person is and what is leading their desires and motivating their desires. What is motivating your desires that are getting activated to be with a particular person in any kind of relationship, especially a sexual one. You want to discern what this will lead to. What will be created from it? Will it benefit things truly higher in a spiritual way? Is that person of the same level of consciousness? Will that person be hurt by it? Is that person really aware of what's going on so that they can spot whether they're being manipulated sexually, so that a sexual person can just grab their etheric energy? That's why often older, younger dynamics, not all, but often older, younger dynamics is a sexual vampirism. Younger people have more prana, older people don't. And so if you get sex through younger people's prana, you're like stealing their prana to give you more energy. But that doesn't necessarily mean that consciousness is being raised. It can, in some cases, some, I will say rare cases, it can. But often it's just desire to feel younger, to not feel so old and cold, and to feel alive again, and to grab somebody else's sexual prana. Now, that doesn't mean that those older, younger relationships can't develop into something loving and truly spiritual. They can. I know people where they have. It's just oftentimes that's not the case. The point is to be conscious. Older, younger, same age, be conscious. What will really happen if we engage sexually and bond through orgasm? What will really happen? Why am I saying that? Take art, for example, where it is known how when you mix one color, there's a yellow in one glass there, another color, blue, you mix yellow and blue together, you're going to get green. That's basic art class. Well, sex works exactly the same way. That person has certain colors in their aura, certain vibrations, certain frequencies, and another person, that's like the yellow glass, has certain aura, color, frequencies, desires, etc. in their blue glass. The two of you are going to get together sexually. You're going to blend those energies into something, into some sort of color. Both of you are now going to be a green color, so to speak. But most of us don't even know what that blend is going to be. We don't take the time to understand it. I've worked with couples from India who are westernized, and their parents want them to be in an arranged marriage. And I've had some fascinating discussions because arranged marriages don't always seem so bad to me anymore. I'm not biased by Western ideas anymore. Having parents take time to help you step back and discern and see who is this person, what are they going to be like, what is this relationship going to lead to, how's it going to affect your family, your community, your career. You know, these are some really good things. And honestly, I think we in the West could benefit more from that kind of, if not parents setting us up in an arranged marriage, certainly a group of close friends saying, listen, we're going to sit down and help you get out of those lower centers into the higher centers and really look at what's going to happen if you mix and blend with this person. Are both of you going to have these new beautiful colors and vibrations? Or is one person going to lose colors and vibrations and the other person's going to gain some at the expense of somebody else? Or are you both going to fall and you're just going to look like mud? What's going to happen? That's what orgasm does. Orgasm is the blending of etheric energy. That's what people are experiencing. And that energy is moving through chakras at a certain level. And it can move high up in the chakras. You can have an orgasm that feels really high, but then it can crash and fall really easily if it can't be sustained at that high level as well. So there's a lot going on in sex that we're going to continue to learn more and more about as more and more people go into the first initiation. And to be quite honest, I'm pretty certain that the more first and second initiation people we have on the planet, the less we're going to have sex, because we're going to create primarily from the higher centers, and that doesn't engage the lower centers much at all. We'll even create babies in a completely different way than we create them right now. So esoterically, it is believed that orgasm is the blending of our energy fields. I've already talked about that. That is why ideally before we have sex with anybody, we consider who we're blending with. I've talked about that, what's motivating the blend to take place, what that blend will result in, and are we going to be responsible for what that blend creates? If you just took time to answer every point in that one sentence before you had sex with anybody, take time. Take a good month or 2 months or a year, 2 years. Really look at just answering those points. Most likely, most of the time, you'll say, nah, don't want to have sex with that person. Might be a really great person, but I'm not ready to be responsible for the blend that will be created there. The busted relationships, the children that may come, the hurt feelings, etc., etc. And as I look at my motivations, maybe they're not the best. Maybe I say it's a soulmate connection, but it's really, I just want somebody to rescue me from my loneliness. Because being alone is too hard, and I don't know how to create a support group of friends, and that's a really hard thing to do, especially in the West, where families are so broken up, etc., etc. So, better be with somebody, so just have sex, it's a soulmate connection, and then I'll call somebody like me, wondering why my soulmate connection didn't work out so well, why we didn't mate soulfully for very long. So only by answering all these questions will we, quoting from the Initiation Human Solar text now, fulfill every duty and obligation, my words, take care of what we create, control every action and deed, my words, be conscious of who we blend our energy with, and fulfill the spiritual law perfectly, my words, by creating only that which expands consciousness. So you've made it to the sex video. It was a long video. You may have had to stop and start it at various points in time, but I hope that it was an enriching video for you. And if you enjoy this video, as usual, I ask you to support this work. This is something I really would like to do full time. I can only do that if I can afford to do that. And if you do support this work, you get copies of charts, books, and an inside look into our process and what's next. I use the word our because my dream is to have not just me, but other people help with these writings, these teachings. You can help by becoming a patron at Soul to Spirit, patreon.com Soul to Spirit. Visit the website, soul2spirit.com, for more information. Enjoy the YouTube channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share. And as usual, I like to give credit where credit's due. This video was created and narrated by me, Dr. Lisa Love. The Pure of Heart music you hear in the background was licensed for use from royalty-free-meditationmusic.com. Photos purchased from 123rf.com. Thanks for watching.